Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about inline editing and how you can utilize it in decisions. So inline editing allows users to make changes to data using a report viewer style portal. This is done by allowing users to left click in a cell and change its value. And today we're going to be talking about how it applies to report viewers and data grids, which are a report viewer on a form, as you can see on the right. So a use case of this would be if you wanted to review and edit information in a singular place that you might have imported from somewhere else, or give you the ability to make changes on the fly. So a use case that we actually have here in Decisions, we have an online retailer that gets promotional deals imported via CSV file. It can then be reviewed and edited before it goes live on the retailer's website and make sure that all of those numbers are correct. It gives it one singular place where you can review and edit that information before saving it to the database. And here are a couple of the database structures that are going to work with inline editing. So let's get talking about how it actually works in Decisions. We're going to talk about the first one, which is going to be forms and data grids. So you're going to be able to utilize an advanced data grid on a form to perform changes. So you can either have it be permanent by using some type of save entity step as seen on the bottom, or you can have it be like a temporary change on the top where you can just manipulate that data if you want to send an email or utilize it in a way that's not permanently written back to the database. You just want to edit it for something in your flow. On the report viewer, that data does get stored, so this gives you kind of a little more flexibility with making changes if you just want it to be a temporary or short-term change. So you can send an email or do some type of logic adjustment in your flow. So the data grid advanced on a form is going to look like this. You'll start by dragging the step over. You'll have to enable inline editing on grid mode. You'll have to pick what data type you're reporting on, and then it will give you the option to format the report on the bottom. When you get into that formatting of the report, that account data source will already be there because we designated that on the previous properties panel right there under types, step 3. And then you'll just have to add the data fields. You'll notice that there is no data to be displayed because you actually have to fetch the entities in that parent flow. And the last thing is you want to make sure that you have can edit enabled for each field you want the user to be able to edit. So by default, they're not going to be able to edit any fields, and you can specify which ones you want the users to be able to edit. All right, so let's take a look in Decisions at what this looks like for a data grid advanced on a form. All right, so here I am over in Decisions. I have this project called Inline Edit Video, and I'm going to start with the form advanced data grid methodology for inline editing. So we're going to let's just start with a flow because you're going to need to eventually fetch that information and save it. So we'll call this the inline editing flow video. Boom. Great. So the next thing that we will utilize is this form so we can provision that advanced data grid. So we'll pick or create form. I am leaving a gap here because at some point we're going to have to fetch the entities, but we'll get there when we get there. We can pick or create form, and we're going to create a new one. We're going to go with a full-fledged form, and we'll call this data grid advanced form because that is what we're going to be utilizing to utilize inline editing. This is a data grid, and we're going to use the advanced version. We can drag it over, and I will extend this out to make it a little bit bigger. All right, and then let's add a button just so we have an outcome path for our form. Perfect, we'll call this done. Keeping it kind of nice and simple here. So we are going to utilize inline editing for this data grid. So we need the grid info to be changed to inline edit. We're going to make the type, and again, you can utilize any type you'd like, but we're going to utilize accounts because I already have it built in. So the account data structure, and we'll just call this input name the account. So you'll notice that now that I've set that up, you can output a name. So we can say the outputted accounts if we wanted to save it in some other way or utilize this information later on in the flow. But you'll notice here under source, when I click this, it'll open a report with the account data structure already framed as the data source. So we're going to add a field for email. Email address. You'll notice it's still blank. because we still need to fetch that information. But under email address, you want to make sure that you can edit. Otherwise, that field will still not be editable. So we'll go back and save. If you did want to utilize some of these add and remove buttons on the right side, under data grid, you can click an add button or a remove button. And once you utilize those, you'll notice here, I have no options. But when I click add, now when I go back here, there is a button to add, and you can kind of provision that, or you can remove in the same capacity. Again, I can click this and click remove button and save it. So in review of this data grid form, we set up an advanced data grid with the account type, and then on the report, we formatted it with the email field and can edit option enabled. So if I just run this, so this to ignore for now, just to show you that it doesn't work. But if I go to debug, I'm not going to have any information being shown. We actually still need to fetch and input that information. So let's go through and run that. So we can do a fetch entities, and we're going to fetch the account data structure here. And we'll drag both of these over. Feeling good about that. The type name, again, we're utilizing accounts, so I'll just type in account. And you can utilize any of those data structures we talked about in the video. Perfect. We don't have any extension type names, any of that kind of stuff. We're not limiting, we're not sorting. We're just getting this entity results output. And once we have this account provision, we will add this entity results into the input of our account structure here. Great. So now we're inputting the output of our fetch entities. And now when we debug, it will give us those options. And if I double click, I will get the option to edit this information. But again, this is not saving, but if I double click here, I can delete, I can add, I can remove, those kind of things. But again, in this particular interface, it's not going to actually save it back to the database. This is just going to be so that you can do something temporary with it. If you wanted to save it back, again, depending on how your data you're pulling is being stored, but you can do something like a save entities on the tail end to save that information back to the account structure if you wanted to. So when you are making your report, you want to make sure that you enable editing in two specific places. You need to make sure that the actual So when enabling editing in a report, you want to make sure that you can enable it in two places. You need to make sure that the entire report itself is editable. That'll be in the properties panel on the right side there, number 2. And then you want to make sure that each field that you want the user to be able to edit, you select the option for can edit when you click it and go into the properties panel. You may notice that if you do it this way, you'll have this action window populate when you click and you want to inline edit. If you find that annoying, you can go back into the report designer and change the left click action type to no actions rather than showing actions. So that'll allow you to edit cleanly, like in the screenshot on the right where you're not getting that pop-up window. You can then add that information to a page or dashboard, and this will save back to the database, and I'll show you that here in a second. So let's go ahead and take a look at the inline editing on a report in Decisions. All right, so let's take a look at what inline editing looks like in a report. We're going to follow a similar methodology that we used on the inline editing for in Data Grid Advanced, but we're going to create a report and we're going to call it Inline Edit Report. Great, so we can add a data source. And again, you can utilize some of your own data structures here, but we're just going to use the account data source because it is kind of light and easy to process. I'm going to add email as a field, and I'll add another arbitrary field here. We'll say the created on date. Boom, right there. And then you just want to make sure that on your report broadly, you can enable editing. So if I click on like a gray area up here, I get the generalized settings for my report. And under grid view, you can click editable. And then you want to click on the fields that you can make editable. So notice how when I click on email address, it says can edit. For created on date, I'm going to turn off editing. Another thing you might want to do is under grid view, under grid settings type, you can make it specified and change some of these left click action types. If you don't want that slider to pop up, you can say no actions for a left click. Otherwise that slider will show up like in the slide deck. So we've got this information saved. We have a report where we added edit abilities to the report and editing to this field. Make this a little bit bigger, make that a little bit bigger. And let's add it to a dashboard so that we can see what it looks like for an end user. So I'm going to go ahead and add this to a dashboard. I will make a new folder for the dashboard. We'll call it Inline Edit Dashboard. We'll make it at the root. All right. Now in this space, we need to add this report to a page so that we can add that page to the dashboard. So I'll click up here, go to page, and we'll call this dashboard information for inline editing. Now on this page, I'm simply just going to add a report viewer, make it decently sized. And then I can pick or create the default. I'm going to pick it because I already made it. We'll call it this one, I do believe. All right, go through, save that, and I'm going to add that to my dashboard by right-clicking here, going to Manage, Page Dashboard, add a page/dashboard, and I can select that page that I just made and hit Save. And now my dashboard has this information with a created on date and email address. If I double-click the created on date, I'm able to highlight it. If I double-click these, I'm able to actually make changes here. So this is an email address. Notice this email says inline 45. If I double-click in here and change this to another number, like 32, and click away, if I go to settings and look at my accounts, security accounts, it says inline 32 right there. So you can actually make changes in that report viewer that will write back to the database. So again, I can double click in here, go, okay, I actually want it to be inline 21. And if I go back into settings, inline 21 now. So that's how you're going to utilize it for a report viewer. So hopefully you can see how inline editing is going to be a useful tool for editing, viewing data, creating data as well, using those add data buttons or deleting it. So thank you for watching. Have a good day.